Delilah Knox was just a janitor, until one line of code changed a billion-dollar empire. Behind a mop, she hid a mind sharper than the executives she cleaned up after. When her genius was stolen, she stayed silent, until they came for her son. Now she's not just cleaning floors. She's rewriting the rules. The janitor who rewired a nation. Power doesn't come from titles. It comes from truth. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Sometimes the biggest revolutions begin under fluorescent lights and mop buckets. The morning broke clean over Atlanta, casting long lines of sunlight across the skyline. Titan Core's mirrored towers caught the day's first fire like beacons. At street level, commuters flooded into lobbies, phones buzzing, lattes steaming, suits sharp as razors. No one paused to consider who made those lobbies shine. No one looked for the woman pushing the gray mop bucket. But Delilah Knox was there already inside, already moving. At 39, Delilah had grown used to being invisible. A single mom with a faded utility jumpsuit and sneakers worn to their threadbare limits. She cleaned the executive floor of Titan Core's downtown HQ. Her shift began before the sunrise and ended long after most executives had tapped out. Her days smelled of ammonia and elevator silence. But beneath that uniform, behind tired eyes, lived a woman with a mind sharper than the suits she cleaned after. She didn't speak much. It wasn't safe to. Too many smiles with edges. Too many chuckles when she walked past, coated with contempt. In a space designed to applaud innovation, Delilah was treated like furniture, until someone tripped over her mop. That morning, something shifted. Shaquille Big Shaq O'Neal had always built his brand on respect. He wasn't just the face of Titan Core, he was its spirit. A businessman who'd seen enough poverty and prejudice to know what pride costs. He walked with presence, yes, but never arrogance. And he arrived late that day, something rare for him. The elevator opened with its usual corporate chime, and Shaq stepped onto the executive floor wearing a quiet gray suit, no entourage, just him. The hallway had that post-meeting hush where polished shoes had already done their morning parade. But Shaq noticed something out of place, a mop handle, downed across the floor like a fallen flag. He bent down and picked it up. Not out of curiosity, not out of charity, just instinct. Meanwhile, Delilah stood 2 doors down, hunched beside a trash bin. Her gloves were off, her hands ink-stained. Moments before, she'd passed a monitor flickering with red alerts. It was from one of the whiteboard labs, a clean room reserved for only the most senior engineers. But someone had left it unlocked. Delilah wasn't trying to be nosy, but the flashing lines of corrupted code made her stomach clench. She'd written better algorithms in community college before her scholarship fell through. She knew what she saw and how to fix it. Not all of it, just the flaw no one else had noticed. A redundancy loop in the learning matrix Titan Core was testing for a $500 million education AI. She didn't touch the screen. Wouldn't dare. Instead, she scribbled a formula on the back of a supply invoice. Clean logic, neat syntax, a 2-line solution that, if correct, would bypass the system failure entirely. Then, just as instinctively as she wrote it, Delilah crumpled the paper and dropped it into the trash. After all, what would a janitor know about enterprise AI models? Her job was to clean behind the innovators, not challenge them. Shaq walked past her, mop now upright, and gave her a nod. Not just a nod, a real one, the kind that sees you. He didn't ask questions. Not yet. Delilah moved on, tugging her bucket down the hall. What she didn't see was that her notepad had landed half out of the trash, and when the AC vent kicked on, that piece of paper fluttered to the floor. An hour later, a junior engineer from the night shift entered to grab his charger. He saw the red error still blinking, now worse than before. But next to it, a scrap of paper with clean lines of logic, scrawled in handwritten text. At first he thought it was a prank, but curiosity won. He typed it in. The system recompiled. No more alert. He stared, then ran the full sim. The AI engine realigned with 97% efficiency. No breach, no corruption. No way. His scream brought 4 more engineers to the room. The CTO was called down from his office. Within minutes, the floor buzzed like a wasp nest. They thought it was sabotage, then divine intervention. And then slowly the question came. Who wrote it? No one claimed it. Surveillance footage was requested. That's when they saw her. Delilah, crouched, pen moving fast, her gloves off, her eyes sharp, her hands steady. No one spoke for a long time. Meanwhile, Delilah was downstairs, clocking out. Her shift over, her muscles sore, her son waiting at the bus stop near their apartment complex 2 zip codes from Glamour. She walked into the janitor's closet to change. But something felt off. Not fear, Not danger. A hum, like static. Someone had been in there. Her locker was slightly ajar, and on top of it her invoice notepad, perfectly flat. The missing sheet returned. Delilah picked it up, flipped the pages. Someone had written something back. Just 2 words. "We see." She froze, looked around. Nothing. Just bleach and silence. Back upstairs, the executive floor was in controlled panic. Investors had been on the verge of pulling out over the AI malfunction. The project had nearly collapsed. Contracts with public school districts, media companies, and nonprofit organizations, all resting on this system working securely. And now, the janitor had fixed it. In seconds. But no one had called her name. Not yet. Not publicly. The boardroom meeting scheduled for that afternoon was no longer about performance metrics. It was about decision-making, integrity, and proof. Shaq sat at the head of the table, silent, the paper in his hand. And when someone finally asked, "What do we do now?" he only said, "We honor it." Downstairs, Delilah walked into the staff hallway to grab her things. What she didn't know was that the cameras were still rolling, watching. Not for security, for confirmation. Because sometimes revolution doesn't come from protest or platform. Sometimes it comes from a woman, worn but not broken, who dares to solve a billion-dollar problem between cleaning shifts. And as Delilah stepped into the July sunlight, unaware of the ripple she'd just triggered, the executives behind the glass watched her like a ghost who'd just walked through walls. What they didn't know, she wasn't done yet, and neither was Big Shaq. The trash can held something worth $500 million, and no one knew. It was late morning, when Owen Jett, the IT intern with a nervous posture and a badge that always spun crooked, was sent to empty the bins on level 41. Normally, the cleaning crew handled that, but due to a vendor switch, Titan Corps' janitorial schedule had shifted, and someone had missed the executive wing. So Owen, lowest on the ladder, got volunteered. He didn't mind. He liked quiet hallways and untouched coffee stations. Level 41 was where the whispers of power floated through glass walls and biometric doors. It was also where a massive problem had been silently bleeding the company for weeks, an encryption deadlock that froze Titan Corps' contract with the Department of Defense. No one talked about it openly, but everyone knew the stakes. As Owen moved past the War Room conference suite, he paused to adjust the bin. That's when he noticed the paper. Folded, slightly smudged with the faint scent of lemon polish, it sat neatly on top of yesterday's crumpled cappuccino sleeves and shredded memos. Owen almost ignored it, but the symbols caught his eye. Not drawings, not doodles. Code. Not just random lines of logic. Tight, clean, elegant, with corrections marked in pen beside an existing sequence, like someone had revised a master blueprint. He pulled it from the bin and stared. At first he thought it was some engineer's discarded notes, maybe stress scribbles, but it was too specific and too direct. It addressed an exact syntax structure known to only a few top-level engineers working on the AI infrastructure. He walked it upstairs, half laughing to himself. What if this fixes everything? He joked under his breath. When he handed it to Reza Takumi, Titan Corps' head of AI engineering, and a man known for 3 things, precision, paranoia, and a wicked espresso addiction, Owen didn't expect a response beyond a shrug. But Reza didn't shrug. He read, stopped, read again, sat down. The laughter vanished from Owen's face as Reza quietly locked his screen and slid the note under a biometric reader. Minutes later, the room was silent except for the hum of the secure terminal. A test environment loaded, code ran, and then, the impossible happened. The encrypted barrier, the one the defense team had labeled structurally intractable, unraveled. Just like that. A problem 32 specialists hadn't been able to solve, vanished under a pen-written correction pulled from a trash bin. Reza stood, face blank, voice even. Who wrote this? Within 20 minutes, the top floor was in quiet chaos. Directors whispered down hallways, Slack channels flared alive. No one wanted to believe it, but the facts were undeniable. A $500 million deal had just been salvaged by someone anonymous. Someone who'd thrown their solution in the trash. There were 2 options. It was an internal genius hiding in plain sight, or an outsider had gotten dangerously close to sensitive systems. Either way, identities needed confirming. Fast. Security was called. Cameras cued. But down below, Delilah Knox scrubbed dried blood off the corner of a 3rd-floor restroom sink. The night before, someone had scrawled a racial slur on the stall walls. She'd reported it, but no one had responded. This morning, it was still there, smeared across cheap laminate in red marker, as if violence was just part of the ambiance. She didn't complain. She never did. Instead, she cleaned, methodically, like she always had. Delilah had long accepted that respect came slow, and silence came first. But even now, she couldn't shake the unease in her chest. Like something had shifted in the building's atmosphere. A quiet alert. She glanced up once at the vent in the corner, as if expecting it to blink. Back upstairs, Shaq arrived mid-meeting. The conference room buzzed with overlapping voices and nervous energy. No one noticed his entrance at first. He didn't sit. He walked slowly around the table, listening. "Sir," Reza said carefully, placing the page on the table. Shaq leaned over, scanned the handwriting. He recognized it instantly. Not the code, the penmanship. The J had a loop at the bottom. The F curved down like a hook. Shaq had seen it before, months ago, on a signed delivery note left on a coffee table in the exec lounge, from the janitorial logs. He didn't speak. He turned to the head of security. "Check the surveillance on the lab floor. Timestamp anything between 6 a.m. and 10 a.m. Check near the trash bin." They pulled the feed, no sound, just time-stamped footage. And there she was. Delilah, standing with one glove off, staring at the monitor from the corner, then crouching, pulling out a pen, writing something on the back of a document. Her face didn't show fear, just calm, like she knew what she was doing, like it wasn't even a surprise. She tossed the note, straightened, picked up her mop, and kept working. Shaq leaned forward in his seat, eyes locked on the screen, not in shock. In recognition. "She saved us," someone muttered. "A janitor just saved us." But Shaq shook his head slowly. "She's not just a janitor. She's someone we never bothered to know." He rose from his seat and walked out without another word. Delilah had just stepped outside for a moment, her body still aching from the awkward angle she'd held while scrubbing the sink. She stood near the loading dock, sipping water from a bottle she refilled from the utility sink every morning. Her son would be getting out of school soon. She had 30 minutes left on her shift, then 2 buses home, dinner to cook, homework to help with. So when the elevator opened behind her and Big Shaq stepped out, she flinched, not out of fear, but from sheer disbelief. He didn't speak at first, just handed her the paper. She looked at it. Recognition flickered across her eyes, followed by an almost amused tilt of her head. "I threw that out," she said quietly, more to herself than to him. Shaq gave a soft chuckle. "Yeah," he said, "but good ideas don't belong in the trash." For the first time in months, maybe years, Delilah Knox was no longer invisible. And for the first time in his company's history, Shaquille O'Neal realized the smartest person in the building might be the one holding the mop. He saw brilliance in her eyes, but also the tired sadness no resume could capture. Shaquille O'Neal sat alone in his corner office, blinds half closed, the early afternoon sun slanting across the polished floor like stage lights waiting on a performance no one had rehearsed. The screen in front of him played the same silent footage again and again. No sound. Just Delilah Knox, mid-shift, unaware she was being watched, unaware her hands held the code that had just resurrected Titan Core's most volatile project. He didn't move as the clip looped, her back hunched slightly, her pen steady. The way she wiped her brow after scribbling the formula, like she'd done it 1,000 times before, not just in coding but in life, solving problems no one thanked her for. Each time the footage ended, he felt something stir inside. Not surprise, recognition. Because Shaq had seen this scene before, just not on camera. Decades ago, it had been Lucille O'Neal, his mother, scrubbing hospital floors in silence after long shifts as a medical clerk. Shaq remembered hiding in the break room after school, watching her clean under fluorescent lights while doctors walked past, never looking twice. He remembered how she used to tell him, "Excellence don't always wear a suit, baby. Sometimes it carries a mop." Now here it was again. History repeating, just wearing different shoes. A knock came at the door. Firm, sharper than most. Shaq didn't answer, but it opened anyway. Kenneth Voss, senior board member. White suit, white beard, white opinion. "I saw the footage," he said, voice tight. "We have a problem." Shaq didn't respond. Kenneth continued. "This isn't about optics. We can't have a janitor tinkering with proprietary systems. Legal's already drafting a report. She needs to be removed." The word removed hung in the room like smoke from an old war. Shaq looked up, finally. "She saved your contract, Kenny." Kenneth stiffened. "Doesn't matter. The press gets wind of this. They'll crucify us. A civilian accessing government-grade software? It's a security breach at best. At worst, it's a PR disaster. You think shareholders care about backstories?" Shaq's silence hardened. Kenneth leaned closer. I know you like your hero moments, Shaq, but this isn't basketball. This is business. If word gets out that a janitor, she has a name, Shaq cut in, quiet but final. Kenneth blinked. Shaq stood slowly, walked to the window, looked down at the city he'd helped shape from billboards, businesses, and scholarships. Atlanta had always been complicated, beautiful, bold, but built on old shadows. She's not to be touched, Shaq said without turning. No warnings, no terminations, nothing. Shaquille. Shaq turned now. Fully. Eyes calm, voice even. She's protected. Kenneth opened his mouth, but no words came. After a long pause, he left without another syllable. That evening, Delilah Knox's shift felt different. No one spoke to her, but not in the usual way. It was quieter, almost cleared. Hallways that usually buzzed with arrogant laughter were suddenly vacant. Executive doors mysteriously shut, trash bins emptied before she arrived. No spills, no paper trails, no messes. It was as if the floor had been pre-cleaned. But Delilah knew better. This wasn't convenience. This was intentional distance, a silence engineered with precision. At first it unsettled her. Then it puzzled her. Then it started to feel safe. Shaq had made a choice. A silent one. No press releases. No declarations. Just quiet protection. The way real power moves, without spectacle. For the next 2 days, the pattern continued. Hallways cleared as she entered. Doors unlocked for her without being called. Even the security guards started giving her nods that felt a little too deliberate. Still, no one explained anything. No one acknowledged the formula. No one mentioned the footage. It was as if the moment had been swallowed into the building's electrical grid, humming underneath everything, unseen. Then on Friday, after clocking in for the early shift, Delilah found an envelope taped to her locker. No name, no label. Just a seal. Titan Cores. Inside, a single security badge, encoded and clean, with her name laser-etched into its back. And under it, one line typed in crisp font. Access Level Executive Innovation Wing. Clearance GRX-7. Her breath caught. She looked around the locker room. Empty. She turned the card over again, like it might reveal a punchline. It didn't. She clutched it tightly, heart racing. She had never even seen the Innovation Wing. It was 2 floors above the executive level, rumored to be where Titan Core's AI prototypes were built, the company's most secure environment, where only a handful of engineers and directors were allowed to enter. She didn't know what it meant. She didn't know what she was supposed to do with it. And yet, something deep inside her stirred. Not fear. Possibility. Upstairs, Shaq stood at the long corridor window of the Innovation Wing, hands behind his back. He hadn't told anyone what he'd done. He didn't need to. Let the building adjust. Let the system recalibrate. Delilah didn't need applause. She needed access. Because Shaq had learned something his whole life had been trying to teach him. Sometimes, the best way to break the rules is to elevate the people the rules were never made for. Sometimes a badge opens more than a door. It opens war. Delilah Knox stared at the security clearance badge in her hand as if it were glowing. It wasn't, but it might as well have been. Her name was etched into it cleanly, unmistakably. Delilah R. Knox, beneath a laminated Titan Core insignia, the kind that usually only appeared on people who shook hands at investor summits or ran tests in sealed labs. The back of the badge read, Access Level, Executive Innovation Wing, GRX-7. At first she assumed it was a mistake, or worse, a joke. Some upper-floor prank meant to quietly humiliate her. She'd seen that kind of cruelty before, the kind that doesn't slap you in the face but laughs behind your back. She tucked the envelope in her locker and went about her work like nothing had happened. She didn't want anyone to see her staring at it too long. She didn't want to give anyone reason to smirk. But something strange happened. At 7:41 a.m. as she pushed her supply cart toward the main hallway, the first door unlocked before she touched it. Not just unlocked, opened. Silently, as if summoned. Her key card was still clipped to her belt. She hadn't even reached for it. Yet the light above the sensor blinked green, and the glass slid away. She hesitated, heart thudding against her ribs. Maybe it was motion activated. She moved past it. Another door. Same result. By the time she reached the elevator panel, outside the executive wing, she saw a button she'd never seen before. A small white circle, labeled INN Wing 44. Her badge pulsed once against her hip. The panel blinked. The button lit up. It wasn't a prank. She stood there for nearly a full minute. No footsteps behind her. No voices urging her forward. Just silence and that gentle hum of unlocked power. She pressed the button. When the elevator opened, the lighting was different, subtle, cooler. The carpet was darker, the walls matte gray with faint metallic undertones. The air itself smelled like glass and precision, like someone had bottled invention. The innovation wing. Her shoes made almost no sound on the floor, yet every sound felt amplified in her chest. Delilah wheeled her cart forward, unsure if she was supposed to pretend like she was still cleaning, or just walk. She wasn't even sure if this was real, but then the moment she stepped past the threshold into the main lab corridor, everything stopped. All eyes turned. Rows of engineers and analysts, 20 maybe more, stared as she walked in. Keyboards paused mid-tap. A few eyebrows lifted. A woman with a buzz cut slowly stood behind her monitor. No one spoke, but the room swelled with unspoken protest. Her cartwheels creaked. Then low, muttered, sharp came a voice from behind a digital projection table near the back. "This ain't your kind of floor." Delilah didn't stop walking. She didn't look at the voice. She just felt it, soaked in the tone. Not surprise, dismissal. She rounded a corner, hoping the hallway would lead her out of the tension. Instead, it led her deeper, into a high-security conference chamber. Its glass doors unlocked at her approach. She stepped in, uninvited, pulled by something she couldn't explain. Then she saw it. Mounted on the center whiteboard wall, beneath rows of printed equations and encryption diagrams, was her formula. The same formula. Perfect, unchanged. Every syntax, every correction, every line of logic she'd scrawled in her original handwriting was now re-rendered in pristine code on the digital display. But under it, in elegant serif font, was a name. Colby R. Hartwell, lead engineer. Delilah's chest went still. She stepped closer. Her eyes scanned every symbol, every alignment. It was hers, the work she'd done from memory, from instinct, crouched beside a trash bin 3 floors below. And now? It didn't even belong to her. She turned slightly, searching the room. In the corner, a framed presentation slide showed a still image from what looked like a project milestone. Executives smiling, shaking hands. Colby Hartwell front and center, standing proudly beside the same equation. The caption read, "Hartwell's breakthrough, quantum loop patch, AI core stability achieved." Her name was nowhere. Delilah reached into her utility pocket, pulled out her notepad. Blank. The back pages were intact, her shift logs, her supply list, but the page she'd used for the formula, the original, was gone. She hadn't noticed it disappear. Maybe she'd left it in the locker. Maybe she'd misplaced it after Shaq handed it back. Or maybe someone took it, quietly, intentionally. Either way, it was no longer hers, at least not officially. She backed away from the whiteboard. No one else had followed her in. Not yet. And for a moment, she felt like a ghost again. Like she'd been elevated just high enough to watch her own disappearance from a better view. Behind her, a door whispered open. She didn't turn. Whoever entered said nothing, just stood there, breathing. Delilah slowly turned her head. It was the young VP, the same voice from earlier, his arms crossed, not aggressive, just confident in a system that had always favored him. "You lost, miss?" he asked. The miss hit her like a needle, polite on the surface, but laced with distance. Delilah let her gaze rest on him for a long second. Then she looked back at the wall, at her own erased fingerprints. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. She walked out without another word. By the time she reached the elevator again, her grip on the badge was tighter. Not with fear, not even anger, but clarity. Whatever game had been set in motion, she wasn't playing it anymore. Credit, in corporate America, wears the wrong face 99% of the time. Delilah Knox didn't scream, didn't march into HR, didn't flip the table where her formula now sat framed with someone else's name. She simply stood, memorized every detail of the stolen credit, then quietly reached into her pocket and took out her phone. She had never used it during work hours. She knew better. But this wasn't work anymore. This was theft in daylight, and silence was complicity. She raised the phone. The whiteboard glowed softly under the lab's halo lights. She snapped 3 photos. One of the full equation, one of the name written underneath, Thatcher Kane, Senior Executive, Quantum Programs, and one wide enough to show the project timeline that claimed the code had been developed 3 months earlier, a full 6 weeks before she ever scribbled it on that notepad. She tucked the phone away. Walked out. She didn't look back. Her badge still granted her exit without questions. But as she moved down the now familiar executive wing, she noticed a shift. Doors that had once opened early now hesitated. Eyes lingered longer. Two engineers who always nodded at her in passing suddenly stiffened and broke eye contact. Whispers quieted when she neared. The silence wasn't emptiness anymore. It was strategy. Downstairs, she opened her locker, pulled out the envelope the badge had come in, and wrote one word on the flap: misattribution. Then she printed the 3 photos from her phone, tucked them inside with a typed memo: anonymous, neutral, professional. It read, intellectual property, attributed to the incorrect team member. Correction needed. Formula was not authored by Thatcher Kane. Surveillance and timestamps confirm. She slid it into the internal HR mailbox, just as she'd seen others do before. Then she went back to work. The next morning, the envelope was gone, but she never received a reply. 2 days passed. Nothing. No ping. No memo. No acknowledgement. On the 3rd day, a discreet email landed in her junk folder, from an untraceable alias. No subject line. Just this: we saw your report. There's no record of any formula dispute. Do not resubmit. This issue is closed. Delilah stared at it for a full minute before deleting it. No capital letters. No signature. Nothing official. Just denial, coded as finality. She started noticing more shifts. The janitorial cart she always used was moved to a different closet. Her cleaning route had been altered slightly, as if to quietly reroute her away from the innovation wing. Yet her badge still worked. She was now in between systems, still granted entry, but silently unwelcome. More engineers avoided her gaze. Some tried too hard to smile, the forced plastic kind. Others stopped speaking altogether. But the name that kept showing up in whispered meetings, internal presentations, and hallway chatter was Thatcher Kane. He was rising fast. His face now appeared in an upcoming keynote banner for Titan Core's National AI Summit. Headlines read, Kane to debut quantum fix for defense protocols. A supposed breakthrough that, according to company lore, had saved the 500M project from collapse. Delilah kept her head down, but inside, the air was growing colder. Thinner. She hadn't lost her job, but she was losing space. And she wasn't the only one noticing. Shaquille O'Neal had been watching from a different vantage point, one that didn't rely on badges or permissions. He saw the headlines. He saw the internal meeting decks. And he saw something no one else could fake: the distance in Delilah's eyes, every time she passed him in the hall. He knew. He'd already suspected after the first boardroom meeting, the moment Thatcher Kane's name came up. A man with slick language and a wardrobe that screamed inherited confidence. Shaq had felt that familiar tension. Thatcher was brilliant, no doubt, but not that brilliant. He invited him to his office under the pretense of a casual check-in, a one-on-one. Shaq often did that with rising execs. It was part of the culture he'd built. Thatcher entered smoothly, smiling like a man used to earning praise just by showing up. He spoke fast, used terms like quantum elasticity and modular brute force tunneling, the kind of language that sounded smart to anyone not really listening. Shaq listened. He leaned back in his chair. Let me ask you something, he said calmly. That formula, the patch that stabilized the loop, you sure you cracked that yourself? Thatcher barely blinked. Of course, he said smoothly. Well, it was a team effort, obviously, but the final logic structure, that came from one of my late-night sessions. Shaq nodded slowly. Team effort, he repeated. Thatcher smiled wider. Always. Shaq didn't respond, just offered a fist bump. Thatcher took it, awkwardly, and left. It was after 11 p.m. that night, when Shaq stood alone in the underground garage, his hoodie pulled low, leaning beside a black SUV with no driver, and windows so dark you couldn't guess the person inside. But Shaq wasn't waiting to guess. He was waiting to follow. Moments later, Thatcher's silver Tesla rolled out of the executive exit. Shaq slid into his vehicle and pulled out behind him. Slow, smooth, lights off. They moved through downtown, then into a quieter neighborhood of converted warehouses, where some of Titan Core's subcontracted think tanks operated after hours. Thatcher parked in front of one marked Pyrus Apex, a Shell Orgas. Shaq knew was used to spin off internal tech without drawing public attention. Shaq watched as Thatcher exited the car and entered the building through a side door, badge access only. 5 minutes later, the lights inside the warehouse glowed. Projectors lit the front bay windows. Shaq used his zoom lens. Across the glass, he saw the formula again. Her formula now displayed in a new presentation draft, with a fresh title, Kane Protocol 2.0 Defense Shielding Architecture. Shaq exhaled slowly. There was no anger in his face, just clarity. He leaned back, eyes fixed on the silhouette of a man who was about to find out what it meant when you stole something sacred from someone who wasn't supposed to have it in the first place. Delilah had been underestimated. Again. But this time? The man who saw her wasn't staying silent much longer. What's hidden in daylight gets uncovered in moonlight. The lot beneath Titan Core's secondary R&D wing wasn't listed on the building's map. It wasn't supposed to be used for meetings either. But Shaq knew better. People with something to hide always preferred concrete, darkness, and silence. Shaquille O'Neal leaned against his black SUV in the shadows of Sub-Level 3, phone in hand, recording quietly as Thatcher Kane paced near his Tesla, phone to ear, voice hushed but angry. Thatcher was dressed like he'd just stepped off a yacht, white Oxford, blazer slung over one shoulder, trying hard not to look panicked. But the tension in his steps gave him away. So did the language. "She's just a janitor," Thatcher hissed into the phone. "I don't care how smart she is, this isn't about brilliance, it's about control. You give people like that credit, and suddenly the whole org chart cracks." He paused, listened, then, "No, it's handled. The HR report's gone. I have the notepad in my locked drawer. All we need to do now is make sure she doesn't step out of her lane. I want this buried. Her name, her story, buried. Understood?" Another pause. Then the phrase that sent a cold current through Shaq's spine. "Call in legal if we have to. I'd rather settle quietly than let a maid rewrite the company's legacy." Shaq didn't move, didn't breathe. He let the recording roll for another 20 seconds, then slowly pocketed the phone. The wheels had been turning for days. Now they locked into place. Shaq didn't storm out. He didn't call Thatcher out in the moment. He walked back to his car and drove out into the night, not with rage but with clarity. Delilah wasn't going to be erased. Not under his watch. Meanwhile, across town, Delilah Knox walked into her apartment with a bag of groceries on one arm and the weight of disappointment on the other. The hallway light flickered as she stepped in. Home wasn't glamorous, just clean, small, and full of survival. Her son Tyler sat on the couch, face red, eyes full of fire and shame. He didn't look up, just handed her a folded piece of metal he'd carried home. It was a locker door. Scratched into it, in jagged letters, "Maid's Kid." No name, no explanation. But the message couldn't have been clearer. She stared at it for a long moment, then slowly sat down beside him. Tyler didn't cry. He didn't yell. He just asked one question. "Why do they hate us when we didn't do anything?" Delilah had no answer. Not one that would protect him. That night, after he went to bed, she sat at the kitchen table under the flickering light, opened her old laptop, and began typing a resignation letter. Her hands moved slower than usual, like part of her wasn't convinced, but the words still formed. "Dear Titan Core HR, please accept this letter as formal notice of resignation." Each sentence hurt more than the last. By the time she reached the final line, her fingers paused, then drifted toward the mouse, ready to save. But just as she reached for the keyboard, a soft knock echoed at the front door. She froze, checked the clock, nearly midnight. She stood, walked quietly to the door. No footsteps outside, no voices. Only an envelope. Plain, sealed. She looked both ways before picking it up. Inside, a single typed note. "Don't resign. We're just getting started. Esther." No logo, no contact info, just the initial. She read it twice, then a third time. The envelope had no postage, no markings. It had been hand-delivered. She stared at the S for nearly a full minute. Something inside her stirred. Not hope, not yet, but resistance. That night, she didn't sleep. She deleted the resignation letter and opened a new document. Title: Timeline of Events. Intellectual Property Transfer. It was time to document everything. Somewhere else in the city, Shaq leaned over his desk in the quiet of his home office. His phone buzzed. A secure upload confirmation. His recording of Thatcher had been backed up to 3 encrypted clouds. A man didn't rise through celebrity in business without learning how to protect evidence. He wasn't going public. Not yet. Shaq had built an empire by moving quietly and striking when the timing couldn't be ignored. But this time, it wasn't about his name. It was about hers. And she wasn't a janitor anymore. Not to him. Not to the truth. Sometimes you change a system not by kicking doors, but by letting others open them for you. Shaquille O'Neal had learned over the years that noise rarely shifted power. Subtlety did. Influence, when quiet, was harder to sabotage. So as the theft of Delilah's formula slithered through Titan Core's corporate veins like an accepted lie, Shaq decided to build a truth louder than accusation, and just beneath the radar. He didn't confront the board. He didn't challenge Thatcher publicly. He built a back channel instead. Each evening, after the halls emptied and office lights dimmed, a different kind of blueprint landed inside locker 11B, the one next to the janitor's closet. Schematics, algorithm patterns, experimental models abandoned by the R&D team because they were either too complicated or too non-viable. Each page was marked with only one letter, S. Delilah didn't question how the envelope appeared. She didn't ask who sent it, but she knew. The notes were too intentional, too aligned with the way her mind worked. Someone believed in her enough to challenge her, and she rose to meet it. Her days still started with ammonia and microfiber cloths, but her nights shifted. She began staying later, not for overtime, but for experiments. The custodial closet became a lab, her cleaning cart, a mobile station. One evening, while restocking supplies, she noticed the subtle difference in Titan Core's synthetic mop pads. The friction level, when paired with heat, triggered a reaction with the newer industrial surfaces. Slightly more conductivity, slightly less drag. It clicked. What if the same friction mechanics were applied to Titan Core's overheating chip prototypes? She ran a simulation using open-source modeling software and adjusted for molecular scale. The results stunned her. The makeshift formula she built using friction coefficient theory and industrial cleaner viscosity patterns reduced microchip heat index levels by 9.4% under continuous load. In tech terms, that wasn't an improvement. It was a revolution. She ran 3 more models, confirmed it, then saved everything under a secure USB, and placed it back inside locker 11B. 2 days later, the story dropped. Anonymous contributor boosts Titan Core's thermal chip performance. Engineers baffled. No author, no credit. But the industry noticed. The buzz spread like an electrical fire through tech forums, think tanks, and startup circles. An internal leak? A rogue savant? Conspiracy threads formed on Reddit. A YouTube tech analyst declared the code impossibly efficient, noting it reflected knowledge both academic and intuitive. Shaq watched it unfold from his office, the ghost of a smile in his eyes. He hadn't claimed her name. He hadn't revealed the truth. But he'd lifted the veil just enough to let the world squint toward her brilliance. The board noticed too. They didn't speak directly of the leak, but the tension was obvious. Executives grew quieter. Reports started coming in late. Legal asked more pointed questions. Someone was disrupting the hierarchy, and doing it with elegance. Thatcher Kane wasn't smiling anymore. He could feel something shifting, a gravity he hadn't calculated for. So he struck back the only way cowards know how, through protocol. He called an emergency board session, framed it as health-related and company image preservation, but the subtext was clear. Shaquille O'Neal needed to step away. Temporarily, he said, just long enough for Thatcher to lock his name atop every innovation that wasn't his. The board gathered one Thursday morning, 7 a.m. high floor, dark suits, tighter nerves. Thatcher stood at the head of the table, walking through slides on executive direction, momentum recalibration, and CEO rest cycles. Each word sanitized to mask its intent. They didn't notice the door open. Didn't hear the quiet steps until the projector light caught the broad frame of Shaquille O'Neal walking in early. He said nothing at first, just approached the table, reached into his satchel, and placed a worn ink-stained notepad in the center of the polished oak. No label, no branding, just the spiral edges of the notebook Delilah had used on the day she scribbled a formula into a trash can. The room froze. Thatcher's voice faltered. Shaq finally spoke. This, he said, tapping the notebook once, is what saved your billion-dollar contract. Not Kane's deck, not that launch banner. This. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. The board stared as he flipped open the page to the now famous formula, the one broadcast on every blog as a turning point for Titan Core's chip program. Only this time, it was in her handwriting. Initials in the corner, DK, a timestamp, a date. Security footage stills attached in a sleeve. Silence took over. Thatcher's jaw tensed. He started to speak. But Shaq held up a hand. I'm not here to argue, he said. I'm here to clarify. The person who created your most valuable innovation doesn't wear a lab coat. She wears gloves, cleans your floors, and still finds time to write code better than any of your VPs. He leaned in slightly. You want to know where innovation hides? It's in the places you ignore. No one moved. Shaq nodded once, then turned to leave. No vote was taken.
No sabbatical enforced.
The system had just been warned politely, but unmistakably, that Delilah Knox was no longer a shadow. When the janitor becomes the genius, the suits start sweating blood. The elevator ride to the top floor was slower that morning. Shaquille O'Neal stood inside, eyes forward, shoulders still. Beside him in his coat pocket, a small device rested quietly, the final card in a game he never wanted to play but could no longer ignore. At precisely 8 a.m., the boardroom filled. 11 members, suits pressed, agendas tight, tension wound like piano wire. Thatcher Kane took the head of the table, without waiting for Shaq. That alone was a signal. But it didn't last. Shaq walked in, nodded once to no one in particular, and reached for the room's screen controller. No preamble, no slides, just a line spoken like a cue.
You need to hear this.
He hit play. The audio crackled for half a second. Then Thatcher's voice flooded the room. She's just a janitor. I don't care how smart she is. This isn't about brilliance, it's about control. A few members shifted. 2 looked directly at Thatcher, whose expression didn't move. The voice continued. Call in legal if we have to. I'd rather settle quietly than let a maid rewrite the company's legacy. Silence hit the table like a dropped gavel. Shaq let it breathe, then shut it off. No one spoke at first. Then a middle-aged board member cleared his throat, cautiously. Shaq, is that real? Shaq didn't look at him. His voice was low, even. That's your senior vice president, talking about burying the woman who saved your company. That formula wasn't Kane's, wasn't a team effort, wasn't some late-night genius move. It was Delilah Knox, a janitor, a mother, a woman none of you had the decency to learn by name. Across the table, Thatcher finally spoke. This is deeply out of context. It's a one-sided. Shaq didn't let him finish. You stole her work, lied about it, and built a campaign around it. That's not leadership. That's theft wrapped in entitlement. Thatcher scoffed. And what are you going to do? Rebrand the company around a cleaning lady? Shaq's eyes hardened. No, I'm going to rebrand it around truth. He leaned forward. She's the future. You're the dead weight. The room erupted. Some gasped, others fumed. The older board members, mostly corporate veterans from finance and defense sectors, shifted uncomfortably, muttering about optics and chain of command. But the younger ones, the 2 women near the east window, and a man from Titan Corps' Urban Development Fund, didn't flinch. The division was no longer generational. It was moral. And then came the twist no one expected. A vote. Unofficial at first, a gut check, a temperature read. Shaq called it, not because he had to, but because he wanted them on record. Let's settle this now, he said. Who do you back? The person who saved our AI division with brilliance, or the man who tried to silence her with a lie? Thatcher snapped. This is absurd. We don't run on emotion. Shaq held his gaze. No, you've been running on bias. Let's correct it. The boardroom paused. One by one, hands rose. First, Tamira Hall, head of Innovation Equity, a black woman with calm eyes and a steel spine. She raised her hand without looking around. Next, Eli Tran, urban strategist, formerly with Teach for America. Then Rosa Delgado, cybersecurity specialist. 6 hands rose. 5 did not. It wasn't binding. But it was loud. Thatcher folded his arms and leaned back, face burning behind, forced calm. Even if you rewrite the history, she still broke protocol. We can't elevate someone with no clearance, no degree. Shaq lifted a finger. She didn't break protocol. You did. She had badge access because I gave it. She had clearance because she earned it. Someone at the far end muttered, what does she even want? That's when the door opened. Delilah Knox stepped in. They had summoned her, not kindly, not formally, but with a request for presence delivered through 3 layers of chain command. It was supposed to be humiliating, a test of compliance. She didn't shrink. She wore her uniform, clean, pressed, nothing fancy. Her hair tied back, her eyes steady. She walked to the center of the room, hands empty. No script. No anger. Just truth. You wanted me to explain myself, she began. Her voice didn't tremble. So here it is. She looked around. I'm a janitor. I scrub floors with more integrity than most people build empires. I saw a problem, and I solved it. I didn't ask for applause, but I didn't expect erasure either. Some leaned forward. I've cleaned the offices of men who couldn't run a simulation without 6 interns. I've taken out trash bags heavier than the egos in this building. I've watched my work get stolen, my name left off, and my worth questioned because I don't wear the right badge or sip from the right mug. No one breathed. But I'll tell you what I am. I'm the reason your company didn't collapse. I'm the one who didn't blink when your $500 million project hit the wall. And I'm the one who kept quiet until now. She turned to Thatcher. You can erase names on whiteboards. You can delete reports. But you can't scrub truth. Not forever. Then she looked at Shaq. Just once. No smile. Just thanks. Shaq nodded. It wasn't performative. It was transfer of gravity. Tamira Hall rose. I support her, she said, formally, on record, and I move that we explore an innovation fellowship to bring in underutilized minds, starting with Delilah Knox. One by one, murmurs turned to approvals. Shaq didn't smile. He just stood. Meeting over. That night, as the city lights blinked into view, Titan Core's stock surged by 3.2%, not because of a product, but because of a rumor, a whisper. That something old had finally cracked, and something new was rising. Justice moves slow until it doesn't. By the time the legal letter arrived at Titan Core's headquarters, the marble floors didn't feel as polished, and the security gates seemed to close with just a bit more suspicion. It came certified, discreet, and cold. Not an angry email, not a protest chant. Just 4 printed pages from the Equal Access Legal Collective, signed by civil rights attorney Malika Sorrell, known in elite corridors as the lawyer who never misses once she files. The letter wasn't addressed to Shaquille O'Neal. It was addressed to the board of directors. The subject line read, Notice of intent to pursue legal action for systemic discrimination and intellectual property suppression. Delilah hadn't reached out to them. They'd found her. Her name, now whispered across Silicon Valley and deep state defense sectors, had become a symbol, not of rage, but of precision courage. Malika met her in a modest coffee shop in Midtown. No press, no camera, just 2 women across a table while jazz floated from old ceiling speakers. We've followed Titan Core's hiring data for 8 years, Malika said, sipping black coffee. Every algorithm, every promotion trend, every reshuffle, you're the first public trigger, but you're not alone. Delilah listened. Quiet, measured. I'm not trying to take down a building, she said, just trying to stand where I belong. Malika smiled. Then let's make sure that space is carved in stone. The firm began working, silently, powerfully, not just for Delilah, but for dozens of former applicants and low-tier staffers who'd faced rejection or retaliation after showing promise in roles the company deemed too technical or not a cultural fit. Phrases that had always meant the same thing under corporate skin. Soon, whistleblowers started coming forward. A former recruiter from the 2017 cycle revealed internal filters in their hiring software that deprioritized candidates from specific neighborhoods. A mid-level manager admitted that janitorial staff were explicitly flagged non-eligible for internal mobility programs, a clause buried inside old HR guidelines. They came forward, one by one, each story like a stone in a rising wall. And behind the scenes, Shaq was funding the entire case. He didn't put his name on it, didn't call a press conference, but through a discreet shell fund built during his education reform campaigns, he quietly absorbed the financial burden, ensuring Delilah and her legal allies had unrestricted runway. He called it repayment. He called it justice with a silent J. But not everyone shared his vision. Inside Titan Core, the boardroom felt increasingly like a war room. Eyes darted, trust cracked. PR specialists began drafting preemptive statements. Legal teams reviewed internal chat histories with surgical paranoia. Executives deleted messages. Meetings went off-grid. Still, the energy shifted. Corporate America started watching. Tech podcasts covered Delilah's rise as an unsung genius. Academic journals referenced her thermodynamic formula in research papers, even without her name officially stamped on it. And at a recent symposium in Zurich, a German physicist called her anonymously published contributions one of the clearest expressions of intuitive systems thinking in modern chip engineering. Back at Titan Core, security began to hover. Cameras were recalibrated. Emails pinged late at night with digital reminders of professional decorum. Then came the message. Delilah found it taped to her apartment mailbox one rainy evening. Folded in half, no envelope, just printer paper with a grainy font. Walk away, or we walk through your family. She didn't call Shaq. Didn't tell the lawyers. She just stared at it, letting the ink bleed into her palm from the damp. Because she understood what it meant. This wasn't just pushback. This was legacy panic, the desperate reflex of a system used to silence, now watching its voice box burn. The next day, she kept working. Until 3:41 p.m. Her son Tyler didn't come home from school. He always walked the same path. 5 blocks, 2 stoplights, 1 crosswalk guarded by a retired school volunteer named Miss Geraldine. That day, she never saw him pass. Delilah called his phone. No answer. She called the school. He'd left on time. By 4:30 p.m., she called the police. They logged the report, promised a cruiser. By 5:10, Shaq was on her doorstep. He didn't say a word, just handed her a device, a tracker he'd discreetly placed on her son's backpack 2 weeks ago, just in case. The signal showed movement. Not fast, not erratic, but wrong. It was pinging from an industrial warehouse on the far edge of Fulton County, registered to a private security firm listed under a Titan Core subcontracting arm. Delilah's hand trembled, but her eyes stayed fixed on the screen. Shaq made 2 calls. First, to his personal attorney. Second, to someone no one at Titan Core even knew he still had on speed dial, a retired federal investigator who now worked exclusively in quiet recoveries. The warehouse was breached legally. No drama, no headlines. Tyler was inside, unharmed, shaken, but safe. He didn't see who drove him there, just a man in a black jacket who told him he'd been sent by his mom's company to make sure he got home safe. There were no cameras, no fingerprints, but there was one undeniable fact. Titan Core had subcontracted with the security firm in question. The same firm that had been paid to ensure asset discretion in times of corporate instability. Delilah didn't cry. Not then. She held her son's hand, walked him home, and sat silently as he fell asleep early from exhaustion. Then she reopened her laptop and added one more line to the class action case file. Exhibit 47, Personal Retaliation, Indirect Targeting of Family. She attached the location data, security records, and Tyler's statement. No embellishments, just facts. And facts, when aimed right, carry the sharpest edge. The next morning, headlines across tech sectors read, Janitor turned innovator files landmark case. Allegations of retaliation emerge. Justice, finally, had found its sprint. The smartest hiding places aren't always outside. Sometimes they're behind firewalls. The clock ticked past 7:40 p.m. when Shaquille O'Neal sat in Titan Core's private surveillance command room, eyes fixed on a glowing array of screens. The building's top floor buzzed faintly with fluorescent stillness, but tension crawled beneath it like static. Delilah Knox was missing again, only this time the signal hadn't disappeared. It was pulsing inside the Titan Core building. The child's tracking device, embedded in the keychain of a vintage Sonic the Hedgehog figurine Shaq had gifted him weeks earlier, was pinging from level 28, an obsolete floor no longer listed on the standard company directory. Once a temporary data staging lab, it had been decommissioned during a recent server migration, and now functioned as emergency overflow storage. Shaq tapped into the camera grid manually, bypassing the security department's gatekeeping. And there he was. Tyler. Curled behind a backup cooling unit in the far corner of the server room, half hidden by canvas drapes, holding something in his lap. A bouquet. Plastic wrap crinkled in his fingers. Shaq exhaled. No alarms, no struggle, no threat. Just a 10-year-old boy who'd slipped into a building with a bouquet he'd bought himself with lunch money, all because he wanted to surprise his mother. But what came next would turn innocence into ammunition. By the time Delilah reached Titan Core, the situation had already mutated. Security reports labeled Tyler's presence as a potential internal breach. The terminology was cold, calculated. Layers of implication, none direct, but all dangerous. The report didn't mention his name until line 5, didn't reference the bouquet at all. It read like a liability case in progress. Delilah stood in the lobby, the surveillance printout in her hand, breath shallow. She'd been here before, not physically, but emotionally. That terrible space where a single misinterpreted action could reshape everything. But this time, she didn't tremble. She took the elevator up to level 41. Shaq was waiting. He didn't speak at first, just handed her the printout from the surveillance system, not the corporate version, but the raw feed. It showed Tyler sneaking past a security door someone had left propped open. It showed him ducking through a service corridor he'd memorized from waiting on his mom's late-night shifts. It showed him sitting down in the server room and waiting. And smiling. Delilah took it in. The emotion built, but it wasn't fear, not shame. It was grief. A deep exhaustion born from years of having to defend innocence. Her knees buckled, but she caught herself. No tears. Not yet. Not in front of these walls. Instead, she stood taller. By midnight, she had drafted her first post. A new identity. A new voice. She called it the Custodian's Code. The blog launched with a single entry. My son wanted to surprise me with flowers. Instead, a billion-dollar company labeled him a threat. He carried no weapon, no device, just love in his hand. This is what happens when systems are trained to scan for difference instead of brilliance. I've been quiet long enough. I clean your labs, I protect your secrets, and now I'm telling mine. D. The Custodian's Code. By morning, the Post had 47,000 shares. By lunch, 300,000. By evening, 2.1 million. LinkedIn lit up with engineers confessing silent admiration for the woman who rewrote the script. Reddit threads exploded with digital forensics mapping the formula she'd saved the company with. Podcasts interviewed anonymous former staff. A whistleblower from Titan Core's early AI division admitted that Delilah's ideas echoed a theory he'd seen rejected in an old folder labeled unattributed concept. The blog continued. Each post a scalpel, not rage-filled, not desperate, just undeniably true. The tone wasn't vengeance. It was evolution. She wrote about labor hierarchies, about the coffee mug culture that divides thinkers from doers, about the way genius, when wrapped in a janitor's jacket, is treated as graffiti instead of scripture. Millions followed. Titan Core's comms team scrambled, but there was no stopping it, no silencing it, because she never used her full name. She didn't need to. Truth was loud enough now. And then Shaq moved. Not in a hallway, not in a boardroom. He called a national press conference. Every major network accepted. At 2 p.m., in a space usually reserved for quarterly earnings calls and product demos, Shaquille O'Neal stood behind a titanium podium and faced the world. The Titan Core banner fluttered gently behind him. I built this company with the belief that power means responsibility, he began. That the greatest minds don't always sit at the head of the table. Sometimes they mop under it. He paused. Over the last few weeks, you've heard a voice online. One without credentials, one without stock options, but one whose ideas, spirit, and persistence saved Titan Core when others failed. A hush settled. He looked directly into the camera. I'm here to tell you, that voice is real, that mind is real, and today that person will no longer be anonymous. He tapped the podium once. A screen behind him lit up with a still frame. A woman in janitor's overalls, standing next to her cart, eyes fixed on a hallway whiteboard. And underneath, in simple black letters, Delilah Knox, Chief Systems Advisor, Titan Core, founder the Custodian's Code Initiative. The room exploded in clicks, gasps, applause. Shaq leaned forward, eyes steady. It's time for truth. Sometimes, cleaning house means burning the damn place down first. The auditorium was designed for technology. Tiered seats like circuitry, stage lights programmed to shift with branding palettes, giant screens calibrated to display the future in 16K clarity. Titan Core's quarterly innovation conference had always been a pageant of polished buzzwords and applauding investors. But this time, something was different. No launch teasers, no promotional music, just a stage washed in clean white light. At the center stood Shaquille O'Neal. No suit, just a black turtleneck and slacks. Microphone clipped and hands clasped lightly in front. The room was packed. Every major tech outlet, global streamers, and government tech liaisons had tuned in, expecting another keynote on chip performance or defense contracts. But Shaq opened differently. There are moments in leadership, he began, where evolution requires more than improvement. It demands confrontation, not of markets, not of competitors, but of ourselves. He paused, letting the silence deepen. No slides behind him, no branding. I'm not here to show you what Titan Core made. I'm here to show you what it ignored. A ripple moved through the room. Then the screen behind him lit up. A single image appeared. Delilah Knox, in full janitorial uniform, one glove in her back pocket, standing beside a wall of whiteboards. No caption, just presence. Shaq continued. You all know the story now, or parts of it. But what most of you still don't know is this. Brilliance doesn't care where you went to school. Genius doesn't check your job title before it shows up. And courage doesn't always raise its voice. He looked toward the wings. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, please welcome the mind who saved $1 billion program, exposed a system-wide truth, and changed what innovation leadership looks like from this day forward, Titan Core's new head of innovation integrity, Delilah Knox. The lights shifted as Delilah stepped out. No music played, no smoke machines, just footsteps, slow, assured, the kind that didn't need permission anymore. She wasn't in a janitor's uniform today. She wore dark denim, a clean blazer, and sneakers, her choice, not wardrobes. her hair in a simple braid, no makeup, no pretense, just her. As she reached the podium beside Shaq, cameras snapped. The crowd didn't know whether to clap yet. Most were still stunned. Shaq nodded to her, then stepped back, and Delilah began. "I used to mop the floor outside this room," she said, her voice calm, level. "I used to wipe the doors you walked through without noticing. I heard your keynotes. I cleaned your whiteboards. I never interrupted, never asked to be let in." She paused. "But one day, someone left a door cracked open, and I saw a problem on a screen. I knew the solution. I wrote it down and threw it away." She let that land. "I wasn't looking for credit. I was trying to help." A few heads lowered in the front row. But instead of recognition, I was erased. My formula was stolen. My name was scrubbed. I was told, quietly and through layers of policy, that brilliance has a dress code, and I wasn't wearing it. Now the room was dead silent. I was threatened, silenced, and my son, a child, was treated as a breach. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but weight. But I didn't walk away, because the truth matters more than comfort. And systems don't change because someone shouts at them. They change because someone walks through them, mop in one hand, clarity in the other. From the audience, a shuffle. Then unmistakably, one figure stood. It was Arnold Gray, head of Titan Corps' custodial operations. He clapped. Alone at first. Loud, proud. Then another janitor stood. Then two. Then six. The back row rose, mops, maintenance jackets and steel-toed shoes. A wall of blue and black uniforms clapping hard, chins lifted. And then the room followed. A standing ovation. Reporters, engineers, secretaries. The wave grew. Full, rolling thunder. Delilah didn't smile. She just nodded once, the same way Shaq had the first day he picked up her mop. But the moment wasn't over. Not yet. Shaq stepped forward again. Mike re-engaged. "Before we end this moment, there's one more decision to announce." He turned slightly toward the side of the stage. "Security." Two plainclothes officers stepped forward. From stage right, Thatcher Kane emerged. Suit perfect. Expression unreadable. His name still on several key patents. Still tied to major deals, but no longer protected. Shaq faced him. "You lied to this company. You manipulated systems meant to empower. You tried to silence the person who saved us. That's not strategy. That's rot." He motioned to the officers. "You're hereby terminated from Titan Corps. Effective immediately." Gasps, flashes, whispers. The media captured every step as Thatcher was escorted quietly off stage. No cuffs, no drama, just consequence. Then Shaq turned back to the mic. "I built Titan Corps to build bridges between community and technology. But I realize now I can't lead that bridge anymore." A hush fell. "As of today, I'm stepping down as CEO." Stunned silence. "But before I go," he added, "I'd like to introduce the person I trust to carry this forward. Someone who sees beyond the resume, beyond the noise. Someone who knows what it means to fight in silence and lead by action." He turned. "Delilah Knox, the stage is yours." Her eyes widened, breath stilled. It hadn't been planned, not fully, but it had been earned. He took a step back. The spotlight shifted. She didn't nod. She walked forward, not as a symbol, but as for the story, finally writing itself. Once invisible, now unstoppable. It didn't happen overnight. Nothing real ever does. But brick by brick, keynote by post, and decision by decision, the structure shifted. The foundation cracked open, and instead of crumbling, Titan Corps let the light in. Delilah Knox had once walked the corridors with her head down, eyes on the mop handle, back aching from labor few noticed, and fewer respected. Now her name wasn't just on patents, it was on policy, platforms, and most importantly, on people's lips in rooms where she was once considered a ghost. She didn't chase the spotlight, but it found her anyway. Not because she was loud, but because she was clear. Every word she spoke was calibrated like code. Sharp, functional, clean. She had become more than the woman who saved a billion-dollar system with a notepad. She had become the conscience of an industry. The first signs of national shift began with Titan Corps' internal reforms. Shaq, having stepped away from the CEO title but not the mission, restructured the board into something unheard of in corporate America. 50% of its seats now belong to individuals from non-traditional and underrepresented backgrounds, community leaders, educators, engineers without Ivy League degrees, and yes, even a retired janitor from Cleveland who now advised on workplace equity. The move was met with skepticism, then applause, then copycats. Other firms followed. Not all succeeded, but none could ignore her. Delilah never called herself a disruptor. She preferred the word rewirer. Systems, after all, don't need to be destroyed to be reimagined. Sometimes they just need someone bold enough to trace the cables others refuse to touch. Her blog, The Custodian's Code, expanded beyond a platform. It became a curriculum, then a media property, then a cultural phenomenon. Netflix offered a series deal. Delilah declined twice before finally agreeing on the condition that she'd narrate it herself and that the show would employ people from the same invisible labor force that once included her: custodial workers, cafeteria staff, single parents working graveyard shifts. The credits of every episode ended with the same line: inspired by those who are always working, even when no one's watching. Within 2 weeks of release, The Custodian's Code hit 1 globally. But Delilah didn't spend her time walking red carpets. Her focus remained where it started, at the ground level. She used the proceeds to start the Knox Initiative, an accelerator for under-recognized innovators, high schoolers with DIY science projects, janitors with ideas scratched into napkins, ex-cons who coded quietly from halfway houses. Every applicant wrote a single essay. What's one thing the world would miss if they ignored you? The stories changed lives, just like hers once had. Meanwhile, Shaq kept his promise, not to Delilah, but to his roots. He took his exit bonus from Titan Corps and broke ground on a new institution in Newark, the Lucille O'Neill Academy for Emerging Genius, a school where intelligence wasn't measured by test scores, but by resourcefulness, where kids could major in blueprints or poetry or product assembly, where mops and motherboards were both tools for mastery. He never spoke at the grand opening. He sat in the back row, watched, smiled, and left before the press could find him. Back in Atlanta, Delilah's son Tyler, now 13, stood in front of a crowd of 500 middle schoolers at an equity awareness forum. He wasn't nervous, not anymore. My mom used to clean hallways people pretended not to walk through, he said. Now she writes them. He lifted a hand, a gesture she used often, a simple motion meaning, stop underestimating the quiet ones. The applause lasted longer than his speech. And then one late afternoon in early fall, not on camera, not on stage, Delilah returned to the 41st floor. She was alone. No staff, no security detail. She wore simple jeans, an old Titan Corps polo, and the same sneakers from the day she'd given her speech. In one hand, she carried a digital tablet with live project updates. In the other, a mop. Not for symbolism, not for sentimentality. But because that hallway still got dusty under the vents and old habits, the honest ones die slow. She moved quietly, methodically, cleaning one section of the floor that everyone else had forgotten about again. It wasn't her job anymore, but she did it anyway. Until she heard it. The click of elevator doors. Then another. Shoes. Dozens. Then stillness. She turned slowly. And saw them. Every department head. Every intern. Every engineer from the innovation wing. Janitors. Designers. The company's new COO. No one spoke. They just stood. Straight. Present. Respectful. Not in awe, but in recognition. In front of her stood 200 people, and one by one, they rose, not from chairs, from silence, from culture, from bias, from every system that once insisted she was not enough. They stood for Delilah Knox, and this time, she stood taller, not because they saw her, but because she saw herself. If Delilah's story made you pause, good. Now ask yourself, who are you overlooking? The next breakthrough might be cleaning your floors, bagging your groceries, or riding your bus. Genius doesn't always speak first, but it's always watching. Make space, make room, or get ready to be rewired. Because the future won't wait for permission.